Hi, I'm Dennis Fernandez, the City of Tampa's Historic Preservation Manager. Behind me you see the Sulphur Springs Water Tower. Drivers passing by it are often curious about the water tower and its feudal appearance. It stands as an artifact of a time long since past, but whose influence still remains. Sulphur Springs was the concept of Josiah Richardson, a successful real estate investor who had envisioned the development of a residential and recreational community that would rival neighboring Tampa. In 1905, Richardson leased 100 acres from Dr. John H. Mills and began taking steps towards realizing his vision. The land was located on the Hillsborough River, 5 miles up from Old Tampa Bay. The freshwater spring in the midst of his land had been a popular gathering spot for both nearby residents and tourists visiting Tampa for decades, and would now become the focal point of Richardson's efforts to fashion Sulphur Springs into a residential enclave, thereby fueling investment as a resort destination. To attract prospective visitors, Richardson began to add numerous attractions to his property. He began by building an elaborate bathhouse to accommodate the waves of tourists coming to his spring-fed swimming pool. Picnic areas and the beach soon followed. More excitement was added through the erection of a large toboggan slide. As the development prospered in the 1920s as a result of the Florida boom era, an arcade hotel was added in addition to a 6-mile-long streetcar line and a bandstand. Near the springs, an alligator farm was built to entertain northern tourists. The springs' close proximity to the Greyhound racetrack provided another lure to the area. To ensure that his attraction had ample water for its patrons, in 1927 Josiah Richardson constructed a water tower over another large spring. The water tower was designed by engineer Grover Poole and featured a Gothic design that is reminiscent to a lighthouse. Richardson's tower is made of poured-in-place concrete and erected in 10-foot sections. The cast stone foliated shell brackets which rest upon the buttresses were similar to those of Richardson's arcade. Created by Hungarian craftsmen, they provided a measure of grace and unity to the project. Once complete, the tower stood 214 feet high and was supported by a foundation 45 feet deep. The interior of the tower was divided into 7 floors below the water tank. Lancet arched windows pierced the skin at these levels. An interior elevator shaft was part of the construction design of the tower, but was never installed. A pump house, which no longer exists, was of a similar concrete construction and detailing, and also served as the quarters for the plant operator and his family. The building of Sulphur Springs that began with Josiah Richardson ended with the Great Depression. Richardson's investments were eventually foreclosed upon due to his failure to continue payments on the water tower mortgage. Before his death, Richardson asked to be cremated and have his ashes sprinkled around the tower base. The tower continued in use until the early 1970s. Recognizing its significance in the early development of the city, the Sulphur Springs Water Tower was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1989 and designated as a City of Tampa local landmark later that same year. Behind me you see the Beach Park Gateway. The gateway frames the entrance to one of Tampa's most historic and prominent neighborhoods. It also stands as one of the few remaining examples of gateways in the city. To the drivers that during their daily commute quickly pass by the entrance to the South Tampa neighborhood, its presence may be overlooked. Located where Swan and Lois Avenues meet, the gateway distinguishes the intersection from that of others throughout the city. The gateway's history begins long before its actual construction in 1925. In 1868, Confederate Colonel Harry C. Culbreth, an imposing figure who carried an enormous frame, moved his family from the Edgefield district in South Carolina. The Culbreths purchased a large tract of land for $1.25 an acre for clear title from the state. The land included the area now known as Beach Park. The colonel began to develop the property soon after, first by planting a large grove of orange trees. The colonel's son, Bob Galbraith, later sold portions of the land to concentrate on other business interests. By the 1920s, interest in Florida real estate was on the rise, and developers were taking advantage of the state's moderate climate and exotic setting to market upscale residences as full-time or seasonal homes. In 1923, developer T. Roy Young, who had earlier developed Seminole Heights, and his business partners acquired a major portion of Galbraith's land. Their intent was to subdivide it under the name Beach Park on the Bay. Similar to D.P. Davis's venture on Davis Islands, Beach Park on the Bay was intended to appeal to a specific audience. Man-made canals and bayous surrounded by winding roads created an idyllic planned community that beckoned those of generous financial means. Also like Davis's Islands, a specific architectural type was chosen by the developers that would exemplify the lifestyle of the residents, that design being Mediterranean Revival. This particular style of architecture had a solid track record of typifying upscale living in Florida, starting at the very beginning of the Florida land boom in Miami in 1920. Prominent Tampa architect Franklin O. Adams, Jr. was contracted as the principal designer for the community and served as the chairman of the development's Architectural Review Commission. Adams employed a successful development technique often used to establish interest in fledgling communities. He incorporated grand entryways as a means of attracting attention to the development and distinguishing the neighborhood. Often these gateways were erected well in advance of construction of any buildings or amenities in order to entice prospective buyers or residents. Throughout Tampa, several communities featured similar gateways: Evelyn City, New Suburb Beautiful, Parkland Estates, in addition to several others. Beach Park on the Bay incorporated the use of two gateways in its project. The first gateway identified the primary entrance to the development and was located at West Shore Boulevard and Cleveland Street. Clay barrel tile roofs, arched walkways, and turned columns displayed consistency with the Mediterranean and Spanish Revival themes of the development. Serving as a fixture to South Tampa for decades, the gateway fell to the wrecking ball in the 1960s as a result of deterioration and roadway expansion. The second entrance to the community was located on Swan and Lois Avenues, where it remains today. This gateway was more modest in design than its larger counterpart. The gateway was constructed in three parts. The midsection was set in the boulevard of West Swan Avenue and continued on each side of the street. There, an archway accommodated the sidewalk, and the wall sloped down to continue towards Lois Avenue. The stucco walls, archways, double-arched window openings, red clay tile peaks, and heavily trimmed capping of the gateway were all typical of the Mediterranean Revival style. The wing walls offered built-in benches, and the land directly surrounding all three segments of the arch was landscaped thick with a variety of semi-tropical plantings. Originally, decorative ironwork connected the central arch to the side portions over Swan Avenue. However, this element was removed as vehicles grew larger and adequate clearance to the entrance of the neighborhood was necessary. The Beach Park on the Bay development, like so many other Florida land boom era developments, never reached its full potential. Although much of the community plan was implemented, only a portion of the parcels were built upon. Nevertheless, the buildings that were constructed represent some of the finest examples of Mediterranean Revival architecture that exist in the city today. Following World War II, development in Beach Park once again flourished, but was absent of the architectural standards that had originally applied to the development. Today, the neighborhood continues to be one of Tampa's most prominent and desirable areas to live within, perhaps achieving the vision that the original developers had in mind. The Beach Park Gateway was rehabilitated in 2010 in a cooperative effort with the City of Tampa and the Beach Park Homeowners Association. Soon after, the Gateway Rehabilitation was recognized with a preserved banner from Tampa Preservation Incorporated. In 1850, Tampa was a small town, mainly serving as home to the military outpost of Fort Brooke. That year's census tallied a population of 974 residents, including the soldiers housed at the fort. Those early inhabitants faced a harsh environment, which included the threat of yellow fever, Seminole Indian raids, and occasional hurricanes. Nevertheless, Tampa's proximity to key waterways and its central location made its potential as a center for commerce and trade attractive. In 1855, General Jesse Carter, an Indian fighter, was chosen by Governor James E. Brown to serve as a liaison officer between federal and local troops during the Third Seminole Indian War. Arriving in the town of Tampa, Carter soon homesteaded a tract of land on the west bank of the Hillsborough River. He constructed an attractive frame residence for himself and his wife to settle in. Carter also built a second, smaller wood frame structure on the site. With this one-room building, his intent was to provide an education for his young daughter, Josephine, through utilizing it as a schoolhouse. In order to accomplish this, he hired Mrs. Louisa Porter, a teacher from Key West. Recognizing the benefits of education, General Carter opened the school to the public. In 1858, Carter announced the school's opening in the Florida Peninsula, then Tampa's leading newspaper. In addition to Josephine Carter, several children who lived east of the Hillsborough River crossed by ferry each day to attend. In total, the inaugural class accommodated 6 children. Due to General Carter's commitment to allowing public access to the school, the building is regarded as the first public schoolhouse in Tampa. In 1866, Jesse Hayden obtained Carter's land in trade for a spirited white stallion and a wagon. Mr. Hayden had relocated from Camilla, Georgia, looking for business opportunities. Soon after settling, he and his son opened a store and livery stable and began operating a ferry to provide a means of passage to the business district on the east side of the Hillsborough River. The schoolhouse building remained on the property, but no longer functioned in its intended use. In 1875, Hayden's granddaughter, Marion A. McKay, was born in the former schoolhouse building. By the 1880s, Henry B. Plant was building an empire of railroads, steamships, and hotels. Plant had been convinced of an eventual economic revival of the South following the Civil War and the economic depression of 1873. He chose Tampa as his terminus for his Southern Florida Railroad and also location of his home port for his line of steamships, which were intended to facilitate trade with Cuba. Utilizing railroads he had already established in southern states, Plant relied upon connections in New York to provide prospective passengers with uninterrupted rail transportation from the Northeast to the Deep South. Once in Florida, Plant developed a system of hotels that would provide appropriate levels of elegance for travelers with the means to support such adventures. In order to realize his vision, Henry Plant set his sights on Jesse Hayden's property on the riverbank. In 1886, Plant purchased a tract of land, including Hayden's acreage, as the site for his new hotel building. The old schoolhouse building was included in the sale price of $40,000. On July 26, 1888, the cornerstone of the Tampa Bay Hotel was laid by Tampa Mayor Herman Glagowski and numerous dignitaries. Work began soon after the ceremonies concluded. During construction of the hotel, the old schoolhouse was utilized by Plant's laborers as a construction office and later as a tool shed. Opening on February 5, 1891, Henry Plant's new Tampa Bay Hotel dazzled visitors and tantalized the rich and famous to come to Florida just as Plant had hoped. The Moorish Palace presented guests with a degree of luxury never seen before in Tampa. Visitors were surrounded by exotic furnishings, porcelains, Venetian-style mirrors, and sculptures, all personally chosen in Europe by Mr. and Mrs. Plant. During this period, the old schoolhouse was retained by Plant and converted to an apothecary, which would today be regarded as a pharmacy. Classically designed with a main facade which featured a large pediment, the modest size of the one-room schoolhouse most likely contributed to its perseverance. After the death of Henry Plant in 1899, the hotel was bought by the City of Tampa. It continued to operate until 1932. Following its closure, the hotel was repurposed as the main administration building and classroom of the University of Tampa. The little wooden schoolhouse remains on the university campus today. On September 8, 1931, the building was donated by Mayor D.B. McKay to the DeSoto chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, who restored it and relocated it to its current location on campus. During the restoration, a sign on the beam supporting the porch pediment was revealed as layers of old paint were scraped away. The sign, which reads Tampa Bay Hotel Company and features the Plant Company emblem, survives on the building today.